Um, Dude, this is the part I'm always most nervous about. Get recording.
Check.
My backup audio. So where I'm at with that, basically, I have a few days where I'm processing it, and where's my recording?
Yeah.
It's been wild, man.
Yeah.
It's been and then I think what I'm gonna do. I think commitment is scary, and I think what I've learned about relationships, especially about myself, is that like I think I'm looking for the 20-year-old relationship where I'm like, oh, 100% yes.
Yeah.
When it's really like, yo, is this a great person? Yes, and can you build a great relationship? Not is it already a great relationship?
Were you ever in a long-term relationship?
I've been in some for like 1 to 3 years. I think it was funny. I had talked to the guy last night, and it was like I think one of my biggest regrets is not calling relationships sooner.
Yeah. Letting them linger.
Yeah, dude. Like my last one was 2 years.
Yeah.
After we were together 3 years, and then we had 2 years of like it's like back and forth stuff.
Yeah. It's tough, man. I mean, this is life in a nutshell. Like finding who you're gonna live with and grow old with. You know. I'm a very sentimental person. I've always been super sentimental, and I think that comes through in my music clearly. It's probably what a lot of people like about my music. But ever since I was a kid, like I knew I wanted to get married, have a family, and do the whole thing. You know, my grandparents were amazing role models for me. And I remember being at their 50th anniversary. 50 years together. Who does that? You know, that's such an old school thing. And I remember my grandfather, who I called Zadie, which is Yiddish for grandfather. And so it was Bubby and Zadie. Bubby was my grandmother. And I remember at their 50th anniversary, Zadie prepared a whole speech to his wife Marilyn, my Bubby. And it was all about Dayenu, which means it would have been enough. And some people might know about the holiday Passover or Pesach, which Jews celebrate every year. And it's all about the Exodus, leaving Egypt, you know, leaving slavery. And there's a song that we sing over Passover called Dayenu, which means it would have been enough, because when one good thing happens to you and then another good thing happens to you, what you had before would have been enough. And it's kind of all about staying humble and counting your blessings and appreciating what you already have. And we live in a culture where all we want is more and more and more. And that really hit me. I must have been like 12 years old. But he did this whole speech about Dayenu and about how every day it kept getting better with my grandmother. And, you know, there they were, 50 years married. And I remember when I met my wife, Liz, who I call Lizzie, the first song that I wrote her was called Lizzie, but the working title was Dayenu. And in the chorus, I say Dayenu, probably one of the first Western songs maybe in pop culture that uses a Yiddish word. I'm not sure. Although the Black Eyed Peas did use Mazel Tov. But that was my first love song that I wrote for my wife. Mentions Dayenu because I was thinking back about my grandparents. They were really like a rock in my foundation early on as a kid, and just seeing, you know, it's so true. Like we learn from example. You know, if there's drama and chaos in the home, that's gonna trickle down to the kids, you know. And God, I sound like a freaking, you know, old school guy, but I kind of am. And so I also feel really lucky. I met my wife when I was young, and we actually got married when I was 22 years old. The way I justified that, other than being madly in love, and we had lived together for 4 years prior, which is kind of insane to think about, but Zadie got married to my grandmother when he was 22. So I was like, okay, like it can be done, you know, if you know you found your soulmate and you're both on the same page and in love. My story as Ben Kweller really starts many years before that. I started writing songs when I was 8. I remember, well, my dad was a drummer, and he would always tell me, all drummers are frustrated guitar players. And so when I was 7 years old, he took his old drum set out of the attic, set it up in the living room, and he would play guitar, I would play drums. He taught me how to play a beat. He's a doctor, that's what he does for a living. Every day when he got home from work, we would play Beatles and Hendrix and the Hollies and just all the 60s rock and roll music. And we had a little repertoire of like 7 or 8 songs. And I did that for a year with him. Fell in love with music more and more. When I was 8, someone taught me how to play Heart and Soul on the piano, like every American kid. Dun, 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 dun. And I saw the pattern. And I said, okay, well, what if I skip the second chord and go to the third chord and then the second chord and then the fourth chord? And then it sounded like Let It Be. I was a huge Beatles fan. And I was like, oh, wow, so Let It Be is Heart and Soul inside out. That's kind of cool. And so I said, all right, well, what if I, skip the second and third chord and go from the first chord to the fourth chord and then the second chord and then the third chord? And that was something completely new that I'd never heard before. Although many years later I realized it's a very famous chord progression, like 1 million songs have been written with that progression. But when I was 8, I hadn't heard it before, and I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna make something out of this. So I wrote my first song when I was 8. At the same time, I was obsessed with the Beatles, and I remember my parents had this console record player, and I was listening to Magical Mystery Tour, All You Need Is Love. And there was something about that melody that I just broke into tears. It was so beautiful. There's this chord change that John does, and the way he rises the melody in the chorus. It just blew my mind, and I remember like looking at the record spinning, looking over at the piano, looking back at the record, and I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to write songs. Essentially, I said to myself, I want to make people cry. Like that was like my mission, because it was such magic. I'm like, how the hell are these sounds giving me these emotions so deeply, And so that's when I became a songwriter. Then I got my first guitar when I was 12, and Nirvana came out, totally changed my life, because that was the first band of my generation that I really got down with, And so I always say the Beatles made me write songs and Nirvana made me form a band. And so that's when I started forming bands with my friends in middle school and high school, and then eventually my first real band, Radish, was formed, and I was a freshman, I was 15. It's a long story, but I'll keep going. Because you can edit all this shit. Yeah. What do you want to come back to?
Well, I have about an hour, so I want to make sure there's some things I definitely want to...
Yeah, of course. Well, so basically, long story short, Radish signed a record deal with Mercury Records. I was 15 years old. So at that point, I was now contractually obligated to go on tour and fulfill this contract of making recordings for a major label record company. So signed a record deal at 15, took my GED, dropped out of high school, 9th grade, for rock and roll, never looked back.
How did your parents respond there?
Well, they were really fucking supportive, like really, because at that point, remember, if you go back to playing drums at 7 and then writing original songs at 8, all I did was make music from 8 to 15. So like I put in way more than my 10,000 hours. And they knew like there was nothing stopping that train. Like that was just all I cared about. And so by the time 15 came around, it was like I'd been doing it a long time, And so they knew, okay, this is his passion. Clearly, these record companies think he's good at it, and we're gonna let him go for it. And so I basically left home at 15, and then I met Liz when I was 17. So like by the time I met Liz...
Did you meet her like a show, or how did you...
So Radish was still a band, and we needed a new bass player. And so we flew to Boston, me and the drummer John, we flew to Boston to audition a bass player named Josh Latanzi. And on that trip, Josh had a gig. He was playing bass in another band up in Boston, so we went to go watch him do his show. And at that show, he introduced us to a bunch of his friends, and one of the people in that group of friends was Liz. And we totally hit it off that night, and it was as if we knew each other from another lifetime and loved all the same music. Just, it was incredible. And she said, oh, I'm going on a field trip. I'm a dad, so field trips on the brain.
Chaperone.
Yeah, chaperone. I'm going on a road trip with my best friend Anna. We're coming through Texas. And I said, oh, you got to come stay at my place, you know? And she was like, okay. And so, meanwhile, I was still living with my parents. Like, she didn't realize that piece of the puzzle. She knew I was 17, but she knew that, like, you know, I at least had something going on, you know? Like, I was there on business, you know? It was kind of a funny situation. And so, we all got our first cell phones. I remember this was like 1998. And so I had a cell phone. She had just gotten a cell phone, Sprint PCS, you know. And for that month while she was on her road trip, we just talked every night on the phone and just got to know each other, told each other everything, and just fell in love. Like developed this huge crush for each other. So then finally when she made it to Dallas, it was just like we were together, you know. It was very like fairy tale. Looking back, it's a total fairy tale situation, but yeah, then we moved to New York City. And
how was being a rock star at 15, by the way? Because I feel like there's kids in my high school that were cool, and like that's to be the star of a band and like go tour and stuff. That's like another level in that age.
Yeah, I mean, it was for me. I was just so naive and so all about the music and not caring about anything else. I was number one most stoked about not having to go to school ever again. So I wasn't really thinking about like, oh, I'm a rock star, you know. I was just thinking, oh, I'm doing what I really want to do and what I'm meant to be doing. So it was almost just like, you know, the whole thing, like if you want to go backstage, like act, and you don't have a backstage pass, just act like you're supposed to be there, and chances are you'll be able to get back there, you know. That was kind of, it was like fake it till you make it. Like I was a rock star inside, like I felt that, so I was just like living it out, you know what I mean? Now looking back, I'm like, oh my God, you know, like I have a 16-year-old son who's in high school, and so it's incredible to think how young I really was. But everybody's different, you know, everybody's got their own journey and their own path. I'm just lucky that I survived all of that, because it could have gone really bad, you know. I kept my head on my shoulders. We moved to New York. Radish broke up. I was writing really autobiographical music at that point. This is like 2000, 2001. And so, and at the same time, there were all these bands starting up, like the Strokes and the Moldy Peaches, and we were all friends in the Lower East Side. And so there was this whole like New York revival happening in the early 2000s that I got swept up in as Ben Kweller, as a solo artist. So that's really like, that was like chapter 2, you know. Chapter 1 is just me alone at my house as a kid, making up songs. Chapter 2 is Radish, the record deal, leaving high school, going on tour. Chapter 3 really is me going solo in the early 2000s. And then I guess the chapter 4 that I'm probably still on is like how I can really help other artists. And obviously continuing my career and my creative output is number one always for me. But I have the bandwidth, luckily, to be able to help others, you know. And that's always been something I loved. Ever since I started working with other people in the music business, other creatives like record producers, mixing engineers, and then even people at the record label level, publicists, radio programmers, things like that. I've just loved that. And there's also an element of, oh shit, you know, I signed that first record deal when I was 15. I learned what the word in perpetuity means, like at a very young age. You know, I learned about intellectual property at a very young age and like copyrights and, you know. So part of my mission with the Noise Company, which is like what I started about 10 years ago, is to really help other artists navigate through that. I mean, the landscape has changed many, many times since I got into this business. And me and my wife always joke that, you know, being a musician, you're always reinventing the wheel because there's always some new technology or new platform or new way or culture itself shifts, you know. And so then like the content that artists create changes, you know, and what the fans want to listen to changes, you know. And so you're always just kind of bobbing and weaving and swinging and ducking.
How has Ben Kweller today?
Ben Kweller today is, well, literally today, he's pretty stressed out. I got a lot going on. So we're 1 month ahead of South by Southwest right now. We're doing a big noise company showcase. All of our artists are performing at the Mohawk on March 17th, Friday night at Mohawk during South by. It's going to be pretty insane. So like a lot of that stuff. So my team's working hard on that. A lot of asset creation, you know, I hate the word asset, but that's what it is, I suppose. You know, digital artwork, flyers, logos, tons of design. I mean, Matt, he's like the head of the art department. He is the art department, you know, but I was like, hey, Matt, head of the art department, you know. He's the man. I mean, he's got so much work on his plate right now, but it's amazing. I couldn't do this without him. Because that's the other thing, like music, the music business has always been so difficult. You know, we always know, we've all heard that, you know, the music industry sucks for the artist. And historically that's pretty true. Nowadays, there's such a pressure to be on every platform. There's a pressure to create a video with every music release because audio isn't enough, you know? And so, like, the amount of digital art assets that have to be created, if you really want to do it right, quote unquote, it's insane, the amount of labor that goes into that side. And, like, most of us musicians don't really feel like doing that stuff, you know? Luckily, I've always had a love for art, for visual art, and early on, when I would go to the record companies that I was signed to, I'd always hang out in the art department. That was always the coolest place because they had the big Epson scanners and the big printers, and I learned how to do Photoshop from this amazing dude, Brett Kilrow, who isn't with us anymore, but a legendary album art designer for RCA Records, taught me how to use Photoshop. And so I've just always been into the design aspect, but these days it's just so intense, you know, like you really almost it's a full-time job just to do the visual side of the music.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say, like, I've heard your stuff since, I think, 2004.
Yeah. Yep.
And then I remember Dustin was like, oh yeah, there's a guy who's kind of a musician that, like, owns a house next door. And I was like, that's no fucking way. I love your stuff. And so I was excited to be able to connect with you and get a chance to meet you.
Amazing.
It's a small world.
It is such a small world. It's such a small world. And yeah, music's amazing. I love it. I mean, it's my
What does it mean to you? Like,
well, you know, it plays into my sentimental nature, which we've talked about a little bit. There's just something about music that just certain songs take you to a certain time and a certain place and a certain smell. I mean, it really just activates so many emotions. There's something about melody in conjunction with words that it just, I don't know, it can hit because, you know, poetry's cool, but if you add a melody to the words, it just does something different. You can have really mundane words, but with the right melody or the right performer delivering those words, it can just change the whole meaning. I always say, you know, Jeff Tweedy, one of my favorite singers, the singer from Wilco, he could sing Row, Row, Row Your Boat, and it would be like a badass jam. Like, you'd be like, oh my God, these lyrics. You know what I mean? Because that's just kind of the thing about a delivery and a melody. You know, even in hip hop, you know, a voice and like the cadence of a rhyme is just different, you know, than reading words on a page.
yeah.
It affects all the senses.
What was it like for the third chapter, the Lower East Side, where like you went? It's all two things there. I'm curious with this Lower East Side chapter. Definitely, those are the songs that I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
And I'm also curious the separation because I do some of this content stuff. Ben Kweller versus Ben Kweller, right? Like there's like you're an artist with the name of Ben Kweller, but you're also human of Ben Kweller.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how that experience of that period of time was, and then your identity during that time. And your identity almost even to this day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my identity, it was always the same person from the Radish time, like when I said that I was really naive and hungry and just stoked not to be in school, and I was playing the part of what I wanted to be. I was being what I wanted to be. So it wasn't like I was being Ben Kweller, the leader of this teenage punk band, and then I'd go home and it'd be like the kid Ben Kweller. Like, I was just kind of living that guy. So it's always been very similar, or the same. It's been one person. I would say where there might have been a shift in the two is probably when I had kids. And that's probably when like the Ben Kweller human really became its own thing. But I still just, like, as an artist, I still feel it's probably this, I'm the same. The Ben Kweller rockstar or whatever is the same. It's just that it's humbling when you have kids, you know, because, like, I'm just their dad, you know what I mean? It's like, they know who I am, like, they've seen videos and go on YouTube or Googled me, I'm sure, at an early age, and, you know, seen all sorts of embarrassing things probably that you wouldn't want your kids to see, but, like, but I'm just their dad, you know? And I think that's the same for everyone. I'm friends with Sean Lennon, John Lennon's son, obviously, and it's funny when he kind of mentions things like off the cuff, like, yeah, blah, blah, you know, and yeah, well, my dad never, blah, blah, and you're like, yeah. And it's like, oh, well, you're also talking about, like, the most famous rock star of all time, you know?
Yeah.
It's really interesting, but I like to think that we're the same, us Ben Quellers. I'm a Gemini, which is the twins, so I do have multiple personalities, I've been told, but I don't know, I try to just be me in all aspects, you know? I've never liked people that put on airs and, you know, I don't know.
Totally. Well, I think none of us know a lot of things.
Yeah, right, exactly.
We think that others always know. I'm like, oh, this person knows how to have a good relationship. This person must know how to do this thing. It's like,
yeah,
they're figuring it out too.
Yeah.
Because the reason that question was,
Yeah.
I do want to go back to chapter 3, because it's interesting to have so much longevity
Mm.
in a career. Like, and I think in traditional careers, people are used to it,
Yeah.
where it's like, yeah, you're an accountant and you kind of did accounting and you stick with it. And I think in music, you hear a lot of, you don't hear the people who started, had something, and they kind of pieced out, like Maritime or The Promise Ring.
Yeah, The Promise Ring, yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
Promise Ring is probably one of my favorite songs of all time, Best Looking Boys.
Yeah.
And I got an interview him maybe about 5 years ago, and he's now an accountant.
Wow.
For, I think for Target.
Amazing.
And I was like, that's a 180. He's like, yeah, just
Yeah.
got kind of a lot burnt out of the music, and I don't know, I guess I was really impressed, and that you found your calling early, and you've evolved, and, you know, you've been interested in it. Like, I don't know, I always find that impressive in career.
Yeah, no, I think about that a lot. I know that I never had a backup plan. It was always going to be music. And I always tell people, like, young artists, if they're like, hey, I'm thinking about doing music, but also I'm, like, really good at math, and, like, you know, I'm thinking about going to college. Or, like, if there's other stuff that you're good at, and there's any doubt in your mind, like, maybe this is a better move than music, then do that other thing. But, like, if you feel like all I can do is create music, then that's when you really go all in. I was just going all in, like, from day one. At 8 years old, I went all in. I was like, I want to be like the Beatles. I never admitted that, especially when I was a teenager, and, like, because it was in the Nirvana era of, like, you know, anything that was popular was considered a sellout. So, like, it was like you wanted to be, like, anti-famous. You know what I mean? So, like, I lived through that grunge era, like, I was a part of it, you know? So I was, but now looking back, like, I just knew that, like, I wanted to do this. So longevity was always the goal. And in fact, I remember when Radish put out the first album with Mercury, Silverchair had come out like 6 months before, and we were the same age. And I was already seeing the backlash of Silverchair, where the critics and, you know, music fans would be like, oh yeah, they're cool, but they're kids. And no one really took it seriously. And I was like, well, fuck, like, I want to be taken seriously because I want to do this the rest of my life, you know? So I kind of sabotaged a few of the things along the way in the Radish era that might have made us more famous, you know? Like, well, I would do things like, well, I dyed my hair every other week, a different color, and I remember the publicist at Mercury was like, Ben, like, we're spending so much money on press photos, no one knows what you look like, you keep changing your look, you're cutting your hair, you're growing your hair, changing the color, and I was like, whatever. And, you know, just turning down certain opportunities, certain TV shows or things that, like, I didn't want to be a sellout, or I didn't want to be famous on the coattails of my age. You know what I mean? So there were things that I really kind of avoided because I did want to do this forever. Now, the fact that I'm still doing it and, like, still have all these amazing fans, that does kind of blow my mind a little bit. because there are people out there that have been with me since like '04. There have been people that were with me since '02, since Radish even. You know, there's maybe 500 fans. There are Radish fans still out there today. The fact they're still with me really it's incredible, and I think about that a lot. I mean, my fans, they're everything to me, you know? Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know why they're still there. I like to think that I'm still making good music and they're loving the stuff that I'm releasing and putting out, and I do try to engage my audience on a personal level a lot, you know?
Yeah, I saw in one of the interviews where you're like, yeah, I do direct email, which I thought was dope, and you did things during COVID, and I was like, I like that you're still active with it. For someone who's trying to start in music, that's obviously one of the common questions. Like, what are the recommendations you have for someone getting into it? I like the all-in thing. Like, yo, if you're gonna do it, like,
yeah, you have to go all in. I would say, you know, well, so. There's a bunch of facets to all of this. I mean, like going back to the pressure of being everywhere at once. We feel like we have to be on every platform, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, Facebook. Probably not a lot of Facebook for the younger artists. But I kind of feel like one thing I recommend is kind of pick one platform and go all in on that and really just build your audience there. I think less is more. I don't think you need your own, like buy your own URL, but I don't think you need to build out a website right away. So it's I don't know, a lot of it's kind of basic. Definitely learn about the business. If you want to perform live, that's great. Live performance is good. I mean, it's really, there's not one formula, unfortunately, and I've thought about that a lot. Like, I've put together different programs, like, you know, on paper of, like, this is how you do it, you know? But I've learned that this is not how you do it, because every artist is different, every audience is different, you know? So it's really a case-by-case situation. So, like, when I work with younger artists that are really serious, that are all in, like, I usually just tailor a plan for them, you know, and, like, this is what we're gonna do. You know, with their input and with also with their comfort level, you know. I'm kind of a weird case because I am an artist who also enjoys the business side, which is really rare. And I think a lot of that goes back to me starting so young and kind of feeling like, oh, I'm like in this adult environment and like, what am I signing? What's going on? So I learned about it. And I'm also totally a curious George and like want to know how shit works. Like, I'm obsessed with knowing the behind the scenes of stuff. So I've gotten really good at all of those things. And then transparency and accounting. I know this is very boring material right here, but that's really important to me, you know, transparency, because so many companies in the music biz aren't transparent, and you don't really know where the dollars are going, and like, what does a royalty rate mean, and like, how, you know, what are the profit margins that are happening? And with music, unfortunately, there's so many different products at play. It's not just one product. Like, yeah, the music is probably the focus product, but there are all these other, what do they say, like hard products and soft products, right? So like the music, I guess, is probably your hard product, and then you have all these soft products under it. Unfortunately, the music, what's interesting is the hard product, the music probably makes the least amount of money, but it grows your brand the biggest. So it's really fascinating, man, when you're, you know, one thing I say a lot is in music, there's 1 million revenue streams and they all pay pennies. But if you add up the pennies, you can make a really good living. But you have to learn how to manage all of those streams. And that's something I've gotten really good at.
Yeah.
And that's probably one reason that I've survived longer than most, you know, without, like, I've never had like a top 10 hit. I've never had a platinum record, you know, I'm close to gold on a few records, but like, I've never won a Grammy. I've been nominated. I'm kind of like, I'm an underdog artist, you know what I mean? I'm like, people that know Ben Kweller. And some of them are obsessed, you know, but a lot of people have heard the name but don't quite know it. But like, from a business standpoint, like it's done really well, and so I'm happy with that, you know.
Yeah, I want to come into do this a little bit around the business side, because you actually seem extremely savvy, and I think there's a lot that you're doing that I think people can learn from. I am curious some of your proud moments or like high-low moments during that chapter 3.
Ooh.
The Lower East Side with the Strokes. And
Yeah,
like,
dude.
And you put out these like, those are, for me, the albums that I'm like,
Yes.
Wasted,
Falling
right?
Red.
Yeah, dude, tell them the songs that I'm familiar with.
Yes. So, well, yeah.
What are some of the stories that come to mind in that period?
I mean, there's a lot. One high moment in that era, concert-wise, was I played a show with the Flaming Lips and the Violent Femmes, and the Femmes are one of my all-time favorite bands. And I remember I was doing a radio interview. The show was going to be in Chicago, big show, like 10, 20,000 people. And I was doing a radio interview like the week before the show, and the DJ said, "Oh, so like, can you believe you're playing with the Violent Femmes? They're your favorite band. Like, oh my God." Like, I was like, "Dude, I know, like the Femmes, holy shit." And he was like, "Cool, I'm talking to them right after. I'll tell them that you want to play a song with them." I said, "No, dude, don't do that. Like, that's too much. Like, I don't know if I can handle it, you know?" And so I show up to the gig a week later, and the singer and the bass player from the Violent Femmes walk up, and they're like, "Hey, BK, like, so stoked to play the show. So what song do you want to play? I heard you want to get on stage with us." So the DJ totally like set this thing up, and I was like, okay, well, I can't back out now. And so we did Kiss Off, and yeah, it was just like next level. I think I jumped the whole time up and down, pogoing, just playing the SG. Yeah, that was a moment. The Strokes was incredible because we were all together on this New York wave, which was kind of like a baby Seattle happening, you know. They were clearly the front runners of the group, but we toured a lot together, and like just seeing that band explode in real time was really fun.
What did you see?
Well, just like seeing them become as huge as they were, you know, like true rock stars, you know, they really... But also, they're kind of an underdog artist too, because they never really had huge hits, but I mean, way bigger than me, you know. So I was always opening for them, and that was great. Just really good touring moments. I think the pivotal moment for me, though, when I moved to New York, right before I made Sha Sha, which was my debut album with the songs you mentioned, I made a CD, like a bootleg CD called Freak Out. It's Ben Kweller. And I printed up 1,000 copies and played as many shows around New York as I could. And one day I got a phone call, and it was a voicemail from this dude, Evan Dando. He had a band called the Lemonheads back in the 90s, and they were one of my favorite bands. And he left me a message that said, "Hi, Ben Kweller, this is Evan Dando calling, and I got your CD and I can't stop listening to it. Give me a call." And so I was like, oh my God. And that really was like the moment that really everything changed, because up until that point with Radish and everything, the people that were kind of kissing my ass were music business people that like wanted a piece of me. And Evan calling me was the first person that I considered a peer, or like, you know, a fellow artist that was like recognizing my talent. And so I called him back and I'm like, "Dude, what's up?" He's like, "Dude, you want to go on tour?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Great, I'm flying into Hartford tomorrow. Can you pick me up at the airport?" And I said, "Yes." And so I hopped in my gray Volvo, my acoustic guitar in the trunk, went to Hartford, Connecticut airport, picked him up, and we toured for like 6 months together. And so all of my first shows as Ben Kweller were opening for Evan Dando, Lemonheads. And so all my first fans were Lemonheads fans. Also, that was right when Napster was at its peak. And so for me, I have always loved Napster because I was one of the positive side effects of that company, because people would come up to me at these Evan Dando shows and say, "Hey man, like, never heard of you before, but I downloaded some songs off Napster, so when you played tonight, I could sing along. I knew the songs." And so I was like, right on. So that Napster really helped me a lot, you know? And so that's big memory for sure.
Two things there. One, how did you process where you ranked, and how did you deal with that mentally, even to this day, where you're like, yeah, it's like, you know, you're with the Strokes, and like, I had a friend, I like the Strokes as well. He was like, "Dude, they could have been one of the greatest bands all time." And like, they had everything there, and like, I don't know what happened. I don't know. I really didn't follow them that closely, but that first album was just like out of control.
Yeah.
So I guess what it was like for you to see some people not get as much attention, some people get less, and like, how'd you work with that?
Yeah, you know, whenever we create something that we love and we want a lot of people to recognize and hear, we think, whether it's a song or a product or anything or an idea, right? Like, we're like stoked. It's like that invention process of like, holy shit, I just came up with this thing and like I want to tell the world about it. So we all have that as creators, you know. I've tried not to get caught up, and I'm sure at different times in my career, I've had disappointments where I wanted something to perform better than it did, but I always have tried to keep this sort of zen feeling of like, you know, everything's meant to be like, as at least I just made the thing and it came out, and like, you know, I'm grateful. I'm always grateful for whatever I have. It's Dayenu, you know. It all goes back to that. It goes back to my grandpa, you know. And so, that might be part of my longevity too, because man, I would have probably thrown in the towel a long time ago if I was really just keeping an eye on metrics and how things were performing, or like year over year growth and all that stuff, because I've never done that. I'm just thinking of things more from a creative standpoint, you know. Don't know if I answered it.
No, you answered it better than I could have imagined.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, I like the Dayenu, and there's like in Hebrew it's like Nispeak. It's like enough, kind of similar.
Speak, yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying. I guess I started feeling like a low moment for you during that period. Like you have a guitar. I mean, I think songs come from your experiences in your head. And
yeah, a low moment of me like going to drive to the airport for Evandando, or
no, just during that era of like you maybe you're alone in some room. I don't know where you have vision.
Oh yeah. You mean the Dayenu song itself?
No, or just during that period of time. Like, what were some of the was there a low moment, or like, you know, I'm in New York, like I'm out here.
Yeah, well, okay, specifically, I do remember one moment, now that I'm just like thinking of disappointments and stuff. There was a moment on my second album, which came out in 2003, it was called On My Way. And during Sha Sha, I was able to tour the world and like went to Japan and Australia and Europe a few times, and was building my audience globally. And so then my sophomore album, On My Way, came out, and super excited about that. We had a tour in Europe that was booked. It might have also included Australia and Japan. Anyway, this tour was booked, but at the time I still wasn't profitable enough to go and do an international tour and fly my whole band and crew. I wasn't profitable enough to do that on our own. So the record label would have to give us tour support, which is a thing that's kind of rare these days. The major labels still do it, but back in the day, because if you're developing an artist, there isn't a lot of income happening, so someone's got to fund that tour, right? That's tour support. RCA decided at the last minute, because they were probably looking at certain metrics for my record sales or whatever reason. I remember the head of international told us that they weren't going to give us tour support for this European tour that was already booked. And that was a pretty crushing blow for me, because I knew we were building something really great, and I knew that this was probably going to be the last tour overseas that would need tour support, because at that point I'd be playing on the tour after. I would have a higher ticket price and probably more people coming to the shows, and so we could probably bootstrap the tours. And that was a big bummer. So the tour never happened. And so then I think it wasn't until my third album, which was the self-titled album, which came out in 2006, that one, at that point, I was going to say brand, just because I'm talking to you, dude. But, you know, my brand was big enough on the self-titled album where I could afford to like go. I didn't need tour support ever again. So like I was able to like grow through that time on the second album organically, luckily. But I remember, I just always felt like had I gotten that tour support, things probably would have happened quicker and maybe bigger, you know. But I try not to look back, you know. That's another thing. Like I always say, like, I have jam-nesia. That's what I call it. I call it jam-nesia because like I have a very short-term memory for tours and shows. And I think that's also part of the longevity, survival. The key to longevity is to kind of not remember everything. Because like I have friends that remember, like bandmates and crew members who remember like every show in every city, or that one time, remember when I like got sick when we were in Vancouver, or like, you know, and like I feel like when you remember too much, it almost that can kind of set you up for failure a little bit. So I don't know. I think. Do you know what I'm saying? So
Totally.
so part of me, like, kind of like every day is a new day. It's kind of a weird concept, but I do feel like my jam-nesia has actually been really good because I'm always starting from like a new blank canvas. Obviously, there are certain things that I'm cognizant of, and like I remember a lot of shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think like the kind of the more macro, like bigger picture stuff, I don't harp on all these little things that happened in the past. Is what I'm trying to say. That's important.
Damn, dude. It's amazing to think about like the evolution of your career, right? Where it's like always wanted to do it, did Radish, then was like, wanted to go solo, and then like how did it evolve from there in terms of the career stuff? Because I think you also write music, you have a label. I'm curious like the different webs that have been spawned.
Yeah, I mean so I went solo, made a few albums as Ben Kweller. I think on my second or third album, it was the second album, On My Way, when I did get the tour support. So around that time, 2004, Sony Records in France reached out. They had an artist named Pierre Guimard, and he was a big fan of mine. And they were wondering if I would be interested in producing his album. And so I was like, yeah, I would love to do that, because I love record making, I love production. And so I produced, that was the first album that I produced professionally. You know, I would always like record friends' bands and stuff in high school, and always had a little studio in my bedroom. You know, I just love that. But that was the first time where someone paid me to produce a record. I took it very seriously and ended up making a second album as well. And so that's when, like, me as a producer, that side of my world opened up. And then that kind of bleeds into the songwriting. I'm known maybe most in the industry as a great songwriter, and so I embrace that, and people come to me that need help with choruses or just want to co-write. I love the songwriting process is my favorite, because that's when you're truly inventing shit that hasn't happened before, and you're just grabbing words and melodies out of thin air, and then all of a sudden at the end of the day you have a song that has never been heard before, and now it can be heard. That's cool. So I love writing with people, and these days writing and producing, they kind of bleed together a lot. Things used to be more separated. We had songwriters and producers. A lot of producers are also great writers now, and so when I'm producing a record, a lot of times I end up helping with some of the songwriting. And then the record label aspect happened when I moved to Austin in 2008. My record deal with ATO Records was up, and I decided not to re-sign with them, and instead I was like, I'm going to start my own label. And at that point, I'd had many years of experience in the record business and understood the copyright structure and just how all, like, the inner workings, because it's something that I want to know, and I was an expert at that point. And so I started the Noise Company. Right there, y'all. Oh! And so, so that's when I put out an album called Go Fly a Kite. That was our first release, and I remember I went all out on the artwork. It was funny because being on ATO Records, they always have these rules in place, like you can't spend more than $3 per unit for artwork. And I was always like, what's up with that? Like, what if it's an amazing, like, if it's the best artwork ever and people are going to love it, why wouldn't we do that? So when I started Noise Co., the first thing with this album, Go Fly a Kite, I was like, dude, I'm going to go all in on the artwork. And after doing that, I realized why ATO had a rule. $3 is the ceiling, because there's no profit on that thing. But we got nominated for a Grammy for Best Album Artwork in 2012. So that was really cool. So we got to do the red carpet and the whole thing. So, it kind of paid back in a different intangible, which was rewarding. And then I discovered this band here in Austin called Wild Child, who were amazing. And so we signed them. They were our first artist. And then they went on to sell lots of records, and then they upstreamed to a much bigger label called Dual Tone Records. Then they broke up, and Kelsey, the singer, started Sir Woman, who's a really popular band right now in Austin. But at the South by Southwest showcase that we're doing, Wild Child's doing a reunion show at our show, which is really cool.
I love the. It's like there was always a theme for you, and you just kind of explored it in different ways, right? It was like making it yourself, or being a band, and being a producer, and all these different things. I don't know. I gotta. When you were starting out, like, how much did you make back in the day? Like, I don't even
money
know.
wise.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what these like 15-year-old salaries are like.
Yeah. So it was. Let's frame this correctly, because it was the mid to late 90s. The music business was still huge. CD sales were enormous. There was no Napster, okay? So like music still had a lot of value at $15 a unit. And so the record labels had a lot of money to spend because they were making a lot of money. So when Radish was a thing, actually all 6 major labels at the time wanted to sign us, and so there was actually a bidding war. And it was kind of nuts. And that's a whole other episode. I could talk about the stories that happened, like going to Madonna's house and hanging with Tom Petty, and like, yeah. So
Probably can't okay.
I know. We touch on it a little bit, maybe. But so everyone wanted to sign us. We didn't go with the label that offered the most money. We went with Mercury Records. Mainly because Danny Goldberg was the president of Mercury at the time, and he was Nirvana's manager. And because I loved Nirvana and Kurt Cobain was my hero, I really believed in my heart. At 15, I was like, well, if this guy worked with Kurt, then like, maybe some of that would be good for me, Horrible business decision,
I was hoping it would turn out well.
Yeah, no, don't ever. So like, that was probably, first mistake. But Danny's a great guy, and like, it was a wonderful. But again, like, it was all meant to be. Like, I really do believe that, and it all set me up to become Ben Kweller, because I wasn't like this teen pop star, or a flash in the pan like Silverchair, who actually continue to make really cool music, and they're really a great band. I like Silverchair. Anyway, so what was cool about the music business back then, if a company really liked you and saw potential in you, they did have money. And so we signed a really big record deal. And so I want to say that I got maybe $250,000 to myself. John, the drummer, I think got about the same. And we were basically a partnership. I mean, shit had to get real. Like, we had to incorporate and do the whole thing. Like, we had
15.
At 15. And my parents, because I was a minor, my parents had to become my legal guardians, like, in a business sense. Like, they almost had to like divorce me from being parents, and had to become basically like guardian trustees. And then they were kind of on the line, like, because there was like, he's 15, like, it could be, he could like tomorrow after signing this contract say, I don't want to do it. And like, apparently at 15 you have that leeway because you're not 18. So there were all these things that had to happen, but I got good money from that record advance. And then there was the publishing deal. I'm gonna do a side note here and just give you guys out there a little bit of music biz, sort of copyright law information. Every song has 2 copyrights in it. There's the copyright of the sound recording, which is the actual recording that you like. So like, let's take like a famous song like Smells Like Teen Spirit, since we're in the Nirvana train. Okay, that recording of Nirvana playing Smells Like Teen Spirit, that has a copyright, and it's called the master copyright. That's what the record company owns. Then there's another copyright in that song called the publishing, and that's the song itself. That's literally like the words and the music and the melody that Kurt wrote. And publishing companies own that copyright. So what's kind of interesting, if you go back to the 1960s with Bob Dylan, he had a genius manager who basically realized, like, oh my God, Bob Dylan, like, you're an amazing songwriter. He's like, Columbia Records owns your recordings of Mr. Tambourine Man and all your other songs. Columbia owns that master recording, but you still own the publishing to the song. So I'm going to go have my other artists record your songs, and then their labels will own that master recording copyright, but we'll own the publishing because it's your song. So Mamas and the Papas and the Byrds, all these bands would cover Bob Dylan. That's why, if you ever think about it, there's a lot of Dylan covers. And that's because his manager, Albert Grossman, had this genius idea of like, basically you're duplicating the same copyright. So, and that's kind of historically why a lot of people in the biz would always say, oh, it's all about publishing the songwriting, because a song can be reproduced many times and someone's still getting royalties from that. A sound recording is only owned by that record company. Okay, so anyway, sorry for the tangent.
No, that was great.
But Mercury Records owned our sound recordings, and we got good money for that, which is an advance, by the way. It's not like you just got money. It's that you now are in debt $500,000. If you took both of our quarter mills, me and the drummer that we split, now we're in debt $500,000. We'll never recoup. Radish will still never recoup. Because also the dirty little secret that not a lot of people know about the music business is you sign a record deal and you get a royalty rate. And at the time, I think Radish got a 15-point royalty rate, which is basically 15% of net revenue. Very low, because there's hardly any net revenue to begin with. But 15% of that, you recoup at that rate. So even if they bring in $100, they don't put $100 on your P&L as recoupment. They only put $15. So they brought in $100, but only 15 goes towards that $500,000 that they threw down. So anyway, whatever. But it was a good bargain because, and it's a high risk business. So like that's kind of at least what the other side would tell you is like, yeah, it's a high risk business. Dude, we're giving you the seed funding for your little music operation here. Here's $500,000. It's a lot of money. So so whatever. I'm not gonna diss at all what I went through because that money that I got set me up, dude. But going to the publishing deal, so we did the record deal, and then there's the songwriting, right, which was me. I wrote all the songs. And so I signed with Famous Music Publishing, which is owned by Sony ATV now. And that literally was $1 million publishing deal.
For that album.
Well, so the way publishing works, so record deals, the agreements are done in albums.
Okay.
Publishing deals are done in songs. So it was like a certain amount of songs, and I think that it was basically like it was like 12 songs per album or whatever. So it was a 2-album deal, which was kind of insane. $1 million for 2 albums of songs. So the first qualifying album was the Sha Sha album that came out. Sha Sha broke up. I went solo, put out did I say Sha Sha?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, yeah, the Radish album was the first publishing qualifying album for the $1 million contract, and then the second qualifying album was Sha Sha when I went solo. That will recoup because Sha Sha has done really well. But still, it's taken a long time. 20 years later,
I have about 10 minutes.
Okay. Oh shit.
No. It's been awesome talking. I want to hear all these stories.
Dude, I know. I would love to do a straight just business one. We should do it at some point.
The business stuff is like a lot of the, and I'm interested more than not just brand. Like all of this is cool.
Yeah.
And then do you have a thing at 4 around
here?
Yeah. I'm saying you can stay here.
Chill.
Yeah, do your work stuff. I just have to have a call at 2.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's great.
2 things I wanted to make sure we get it on. I did want to talk about like how your business looks, because I feel like you have real estate, you have I think there's some wisdom in there that I think people could benefit. Before that though, Madonna, Tom Petty. Do you meet Jackson? Do you meet Cobain or Jackson or any of these?
Jackson.
Michael Jackson?
Oh God. No, I never met Michael Jackson. I never met Kurt Cobain. Never saw Nirvana live. Because Kurt died in 94, and then my whole Radish thing started in 96. So that was gone. Hung with Dave Grohl a lot. We're friends. Actually, there's an amazing YouTube video. If you type in Foo Fighters, Ben Kweller, at ACL Fest. We played Big Me together. It was really incredible. Taylor Hawkins, the whole thing. I don't know if I want to go there for the story, so I don't want to waste the time on that. But the business side, I want to say real quick though, I was 16. I got $1 million publishing deal. That's incredible. It set me up like that. So I will always, even if Sony will always own the publishing copyrights for those songs, I'm cool with that, because one of my great mentors wasn't even in music at all. He was my first landlord in Brooklyn, New York, Scott Cohen. I rented an apartment from him on Smith Street in Brooklyn. And like a year later, maybe we were there for 2 years, and I called Scott. I'm like, hey man, I'm thinking about buying something. Like I'm looking at condos and co-ops, you know, in Brooklyn. And he's like, dude, if you can save up a little more of a down payment, get a multifamily dwelling, because then you'll live in an apartment and you can rent out another one or two others, and that'll pay towards your mortgage. So that's when I first learned that concept of almost using other people's money, you know. And so that's what we did. We bought a brownstone in a neighborhood that was still really inexpensive in Brooklyn, Lower Carroll Gardens. And I remember I looked for we were looking for like a 3-family brownstone. That was the goal. And I looked for like 6 or 7 months. I had a binder of listings and different real estate agents I was working with. And finally, I'd look at the New York Times every Sunday, open houses, and there was one for sale by owner, $780,000 on this street that I knew in Carroll Gardens. I called the guy up at like 9 a.m. and I said, hey, I'd love to come and look at this house. And he said, oh, well, I already have people coming at 10, 11, and 12. And I said, well, can I come down right now? And so he's like, yeah, I guess. And so Liz and I ran down to this house, and we were like, okay, this is exactly what we're looking for. The price is right, blah, blah, blah. And I remember it was this really old couple, Tom and Meg Cotugno, these old Italian couple. They got married, and they lived in that house for like 40 years, okay? And we're standing in the stairwell, and I said, we love it, this is the one. And Tom said, well, should I call everyone and tell them not to come and look at the place? And I said, yep. And his wife said, well, Tom, I don't know, like maybe we should have other people come look at the house. And Tom said, they're like us, if they want it, they can have it. And so we were the only people that saw this house. After 6 months of looking, like I knew to tell him, yes, don't let anyone come. Like, you know what I mean? Like that was New York real estate. But bought my first piece of property when I was 18. So then I became a landlord at 18. So now we're like learning about public plumbing, electricity, and rent and all that stuff. So that real estate's been a big part of my success financially too, just because it's been the one stability in my life, along with music, because music's like feast or famine, you know. So yeah, real estate. Now my business now is really interesting because I'm really developing a noise company, even though it's 10 years in, and I've had different ebbs and flows of that and different employees and all that. I really feel like I'm like just now starting it the right way. It's funny, like we have our CFO, we have Matt, the head of the art department, and I have my GM, Pablo, who's amazing. And so it's just a small team, and I'm just really learning how to like expand, but like also keep the margins right, but also offering these services to other artists. It's complicated, but it's so much fun.
How do the economics of a label go?
Well, there's all different ways. So like the other thing is like we do artist management as well. Pretty much everyone on the label is also managed by us, because when you're talking about independent artists, it's important that like it's a holistic approach to the whole thing, you know? So like from touring, because historically labels just owned the copyright of that master recording that we talked about. They'd pay the money to put the artist in the studio, and that's all they cared about was selling records. But like that is kind of dead. Like now it goes back to the revenue streams that pay pennies. You really have to administer all of it to really give the artist like a healthy career. So I know we gotta wrap up very soon, but we should, let's do a part 2 or something. I don't know.
Yeah. How do you sing Diana to end it?
Dianu, 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 Dianu.
Sorry to end
No, it's okay. I didn't realize we need a 2-hour sesh. There's a lot of aspects.
Yeah, even the last part with even the label, because it's like.
Because I want to talk like that. It's complicated, so I want to because there's some of our business is.
I'll give you something.
Some of the business is directly like a profit share with the artists. Some of the business, I do this thing. It's the Indie Accelerator program essentially, and so basically. To teach artists how the hell to set up their business, to run their business. It's really to like build them a platform so they can take the ball and run. It's not designed where you're just going to be paying us forever, but it is that kind of service where they do pay us essentially consultancy. You know what I mean? So it's like a monthly fee, and it's $5,000 a month, and we are basically doing everything for them. It's incredible though.
That's interesting. Like, so design, it's basically a music agency or label agency for an artist.
Yeah.
What does that provide them?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, there's a ton of let's go. There's a ton of education that goes into it, of just teaching them about how everything works, because it's so complicated. From touring to copyrights to recording to production to social media marketing, all of it, to like, you know, web development, just like every aspect, we go through that. And then just like helping them, you know, with distribution, because we go through Sony for worldwide distribution. So whether they're pressing vinyl or getting on all the DSPs, which is like Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, etc. I mean, we basically just like, we take the reins for them, and we do a weekly Zoom, and we just hold their hands.
How do these artists afford it? I feel like that's
well, so that, yeah, I mean, that's, it's we don't do a ton of these, you know? Like right now we only have one active that's on this, but the growth has been insane. As far as the affordability, it's interesting because there are a lot of people out there that have money, whether it's from relatives or from other ventures, and they basically they're like, we have this money, but we don't know how to spend it, or we don't know what to do. Can you teach us how to do this? And that's basically like what's happening, you know. It's pretty cool.
It sounds really cool.
You know, I don't promote that. That's like more of like a word of mouth thing, you know. Although like on the website on noisecompany.com, you know, you click reach out and it goes to Pablo, the GM, and we talk, like, it's not, I don't have a whole like funnel and landing page, like I'm not hustling that, because it is such a premium service, but it's also a huge time commitment for me too, you know.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really amazing about your career, as like, and this is my observation,
yeah,
in my view, is that like you have a love of music, a deep love of music that like you called early on, and that's a lot of people it takes forever, if any time, to get it.
Yeah.
But I think what you've done, which is amazing too, is that you've had, and there's probably a longer story around it, which is the balance of the economics.
Yeah.
Like getting into real estate, like you own the houses here, you own the New York thing, how you understood like the deals, how you kept your head above your shoulder the whole time.
Yeah.
And really easy to be like getting into drugs or I don't know.
Of course, yeah.
So it's really impressive.
Yeah,
good for you.
Yeah, it's just I had a producer, the first producer I ever worked with, he always had this motto, create your own reality. He would always say that in the studio, create your own reality, dude, like, you know, and like I've always kind of subscribed to that. Obviously there are things with reality that we have to pay our bills, and we have, you know what I mean? Like
not
there's, yeah, right, exactly. There are consequences. But I've always really just tried to, okay, well, how can we create our reality? And what are the ways to do that, you know? Obviously, like with music, it's weird because you have to have a product that people want to consume. Like the music has to be good at some point, right? Like that is one thing I will say, because it's art. So it's very difficult. Like you can't just take any artist and say, we're gonna run you through this, like, you know, accelerator program, and then you're gonna have like 10,000 followers on Spotify by the end of the month. Like that just isn't gonna happen. Like the music has to be there. Yeah. But the nuts and bolts of how to manage the career, anyone can do.
Part 2 coming soon.
Boom. Cheers.
So my mom made this rhubarb.
Really?
Dude, it's a little hard because it's frozen.
Uh-huh.